Hello again, and welcome to ManchTalk. My name's Tammy Simmons, and I'm your host for this show, and I'm glad you're joining us. Um, for those of you who came out and voted in Tuesday's primary, thank you. And particularly, I want to say thank you to anybody from Manchester's Ward 10 who came out and cast a vote for myself or for my running mate, Dan Garthwaite. Both of us were successful in our primary, and we will go on in November to face two Democrats, Tim Smith and Mark McKenzie. If you took a Republican ballot in Ward 10 and for some reason you chose not to vote for us, I do hope you'll consider us in November. Lot of things, interesting tidbits that came out of Tuesday's primary. Obviously, we have our nominees on the Republican side and on the Democrat side. And then now we can all start focusing on the November elections. I found it interesting, and I think it's important to always reiterate to people how important it really is to come out and vote in primary races. On the Republican side of the ticket, we had 4 candidates for governor, and as I said time and time again, I would be happy with any of them in the corner office up at the State House. I think it's imperative that voters send a Republican governor to Concord this year so that we can make some positive changes for New Hampshire. In Tuesday's election, I think that many people may have been surprised to find Frank Edelblut almost eked out governor-elect or governor candidate Chris Sununu. Many people underestimated the ability of Edelblut to perform as well. Chris Sununu went into the race with a lot of name recognition, obviously his father and his brother, and he's an executive counselor himself, so he's well known across the state. Frank Edelblut was a first-time state rep from Wilton, hardly a metropolis of voters, but he worked hard. He proved himself to be the true conservative, principled Republican in the race and garnered a lot of the more conservative and more pro-liberty voters. And just to emphasize how close of a race it really was, there were about 113,000 people that cast ballots in New Hampshire on Tuesday, and their vote difference was, I believe, 804 votes when all was said and done. I have to congratulate Chris Sununu. Like I said, I was going to be okay with any of the 4 candidates. Ted Gatzis and Jeannie Forrester ran a good race. It came down to pretty much Frank Edelblut and Chris Sununu, with Chris eking out by less than 1,000 votes. And as a result, my job and my emphasis to every Republican or Republican-leaning voter out there is we all need to get behind Chris Sununu. It's important that we elect a Republican governor, and whether you think Chris Sununu is a perfect candidate or not, I can tell you this. If we had had a Republican in the corner office for the past 2 years, New Hampshire would have constitutional carry, but that was vetoed by Governor Hassan. We would have been able to address the concerns that are happening up in Croydon where the school board in Croydon has opted to send Croydon children to a non-public school in a nearby community. We could have addressed that, but Governor Hassan vetoed that. We had parental rights bills that gave parents more control over their kids' education that were vetoed by Governor Hassan. Those would have been passed. Going forward, without a Republican governor, I anticipate that anybody who thinks that education choice is a top priority, that our education tax credits are a good thing and give some of our more underprivileged, more deserving students a better opportunity to pick the education that best fits them and not depend solely on what their zip code is to decide which education they can get. Education tax credits will be at risk without a Republican governor. It's very, very simple. We need to try it with a Republican governor. We haven't had one since Craig Benson served, and that was, I believe, in 2002. It's been a long time coming, and I think it's about time voters take a chance and say, let's try it with a Republican again for a change. So anyways, as I said, congratulations to both Chris Sununu and Frank Edelblut. I'm sure we're going to see more of Frank in the future. He's a wonderful person with a wonderful family, very, very smart, very, very successful, and I'm sure his name will be coming up again down the road. In addition to just the governor's race, there were other races that really came pretty close. The first CD race between Congressman Frank Ginta and challenger Rich Ashew, if I'm not mistaken, that was under 700 vote difference. You know, when you're talking about 113,000 ballots, that means, 10 people in a bunch of different communities across the state could have changed the outcome of any race. I, for one, am glad to see that we're going to let our current congressman face challenge from Carol Shea Porter. I think he will beat her handedly, and this will be their fourth rematch. So congratulations, Congressman Ginta, on your win. Also in Manchester here, there was the Senate seat on the Republican side for the challenger to Donna Soucy in the New Hampshire Senate. There were 3 candidates, 2 from Litchfield, 1 from Manchester. As it stands right now, Ross Terrio is the nominee, but that race literally came down to less than 10 votes total. 10 votes means 10 people who just didn't maybe get to the polls because they had to pick the kids up, or 10 people who completely forgot that it was election day, or 10 people who just thought they couldn't be bothered to come out and vote. Congratulations to Ross. If you end up being the nominee, then I'll be behind you 100%. We need to maintain a majority of Republicans in the House and the Senate, and that has always been one of my primary focuses in this election cycle. In addition to federal races and state rep and state Senate races, voters also elected delegates to the state party convention. A lot of people don't know what that even is. The way it works in the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire is we allow the public, and I say we, the party allows, and that's not really the right word, we have the public chime in on who they want to represent them at the party's convention. I'm sure years ago, the convention might have been more of a nominating tool than it is now. Now, the nominee is the nominee. It's not a secret. We all know on the internet who the winners are fairly quickly. But the other thing that happens at the party convention is the party votes on the party platform. Every 2 years, the Republican Party has a committee that hears from the public as to some things that they might want changed or tweaked in the party platform. 4 years ago, there was a major rewrite as far as the way it actually was laid out. The Republican Party in New Hampshire now has 2 sections in its platform. The beginning section is the statement of principles, which are the core beliefs that Republicans believe in, the things that stay steady from year to year to year. They don't change because of legislation. And then the second part is the application of those principles, which is more of a legislative guide. And that's where we actually, there's various groups that use that as a way to help legislators up in the state house and in the state senate vote more like Republicans and vote along the party platform. So in Tuesday's election, delegates were elected across the city. The Manchester gets 33 delegates, and we do elect them by ward. Each ward gets 3 delegates, with the exception of wards 5, 7, and 11. They have the lowest turnout, and they only get 2 delegates apiece. I thought I would take a minute and just read the names of the winners in case they are unaware of the fact that they won, or if you want to reach out to somebody on this list and say, hey, I'd like you to not vote for this change or vote for this change, whatever you want. But I figured I'd take a moment and read through the names. The delegates from Manchester, now this includes the elected delegates and all the candidates that are on the November ballot, so it's more than 33 people total, 33 elected slots, plus all of our candidates. So they are Joseph LaChance, Mark Warden, Frank Ginta, Jim Merrill, Pam Colantuno, Kate Baker, Doug Whitfield, Wynn Hutchinson, Anthony Pugh, Joe Lavasser, Daniel Heck, Murav Yakov, Philip Harris, Robert Collins, John Slattery, Nicole Martin, Daniel Mattingly, Shivam Ghose, Tony Pappas, Japhet Stevens, Kathleen Sousa, Steve Matthew, Jean Matthew, Greg Van Uke, Lisa Freeman, Kirk McConville, Larry Gagney, Nick Pappas, Andreas Reif, Brian Cole, Mark Langdon, Ross Terrio, Lisa Gravel, Mark McLean, Steve Valancourt, Mark Prue, Robert Burns, Patrice Bernard, Michael Biondo, Victoria Sullivan, Andre Martel, Michael Ricker, Dan Garthwaite, Tammy Simmons, Grant Morris, Lisa Swank, Jerry Bergevin, Paul Chauvin, AJ Everts, Jordan Gamache, Carla Garrick, Dan Pinard, Louis Kalitz, Clarence Gardner, Dick Marston, Carlos Gonzalez, Sonia Brolodakis, Matthew Sipolowski, and Lenny Levines. If you're one of those folks and you're seeing this show before the weekend, please make sure you attend the NHGOP convention this Saturday, the 24th, at St. A's. Registration starts at 7:45. The convention starts at 9 and will be done by 12:30. So this is one of the two tasks that delegates to the GOP convention have here in New Hampshire. For those who have any questions about the election results, Manchester's really good. We have an amazing city clerk, and his office does a great job of getting us the data on elections fairly quickly. Because it is a state election year, it all has to be certified by the Secretary of State site. So the data that I have as far as election results are all unofficial until they appear on the state Secretary of State site. All of the races are up on the New Hampshire Secretary of State site. You can find them at Googling NHSOS elections and scrolling down to look for 2016 primary in the lower right-hand corner. But if you're looking for information on delegates, that information's not going to be posted until tomorrow, which is a full week after the actual elections. I'm going to ask you all to do me a favor. Don't bother the city clerk's office for the next few weeks. And the reason I say that is people may not realize it, but even though we have electronic, we scan our ballots at the polls here in Manchester and we have the results fairly quickly at the end of the day, what people don't realize is that after the election's over, the city clerk's office has to manually enter the information about who voted and which ballot they took. We still use a manual entry system as far as voter history goes. Not as far as calculating the actual vote, but as far as who voted and which ballots they took or whether they voted absentee. Manually enter them. And the reason I bring this up is this past year, we had an opportunity up at the State House to pass some legislation that would have allowed some municipalities in the state of New Hampshire to trial an electronic check-in system. And Manchester was the impetus for it. Matt Norman, the city clerk, had come to myself and Senator Booten and Representative Pat Long and said they talked to numerous companies and they found a company that they were confident had a product that would safely and securely and easily allow voters when they go to the polls to check in electronically on an iPad. So right now when you walk in and you give them your name and you say Tammy Simmons and they ask you your address and they flip through those books of paper and they flip and then they take a pencil and they draw a line through it. What this would have done instead was allowed them to show you your name. You would swipe your driver's license because your name and address and date of birth are in the barcode on your driver's license. You could swipe your driver's license and it would bring you up and say, is this you? And you could confirm, push a button, yes. And they could talk you through all the questions that they're supposed to ask you by law, which unfortunately, and not necessarily in Manchester, but in other communities, sometimes the people working at the polls don't feel like they're really obligated to ask all the questions that the law requires them to. This check-in method was going to not allow them to skip any questions. They were going to have to ask you everything that the law says they have to. They still would verify your ID so that they can confirm that you are who you say you are and so on. The only difference was we were eliminating that flipping of the paper and the crossing out of things with a pencil and a ruler. And at the end of the election day, when the ballots were count and everything's done, all the manual entry being done by the city clerk's office would already be done. We'd already know how many people voted and who voted and whether they voted absentee and whether they took a Republican ballot or a Democrat ballot. Now, in the presidential primary back in January, or was that February? Whatever it was, back at the beginning of the year, it took the city clerk's office 3 months, all hands on deck, 3 months to enter this data. It has got to be far more economically prudent to have an electronic system for check-in, not for voting, for check-in, to eliminate the antiquated system of manually entering and eliminating some of that human error that is bound to happen when people are manually entering tens of thousands of names over and over and over again. Unfortunately, what happened was it was Senator Booten who proposed the amendment in the Senate. It was simple language. It was going to allow Hooksett, the town of Durham, and city of Manchester to pilot during the state primary, which we just had, and in November's election, this electronic check-in system. Just an electronic check-in system. The company that we were working with here in Manchester that was going to do it in these other communities was going to do it for free. No cost whatsoever. They were going to provide the iPads, the technology, whatever questions we were going to require of them. It was going to be 100% free trial to see if this would work. Unfortunately, even though David Booten worked with us and he was able to get it through the Senate election committee and then through the Senate as a whole, we had pushback from Secretary of State Gardner. He was concerned that there would be security issues, that somehow somebody was going to hack into the checklist at the polls. I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure what data anybody thinks they're going to get. The only thing that's on the checklist is what's on those paper checklists. I mean, I could run into a polling place and grab a checklist and run out and have the same data. I could also probably just buy it because you can buy checklists from your local city clerk. I mean, I have the entire checklist for the city of Manchester. What would I possibly gain by hacking into it? If it was even hackable. It was a highly secure system on iPad. As all you may know, Mac has really strict standards on security. I'm confident that it would have been fine. But we had pushback from Secretary Gardner, and Speaker of the House, Sean Jasper, seemed to also not like this and worked with the Secretary of State to say they didn't want this. Now, the disturbing part for me personally is once that bill came out of the Senate, the full Senate, saying ought to pass with amendment, so to say the Senate thought this was an okay thing, every bill that comes to the House has to get a vote. This isn't like the U.S. Congress where the Speaker of the House gets to pick and choose which bills the congressmen are going to have an opportunity to vote on. We vote in New Hampshire State House on every single piece of legislation proposed. It can be it could be some crazy idea. We still vote on it. That's one of the greatest things about the New Hampshire legislature is every idea gets a vote. It might get an easy up and down voice vote. It might get laid on the table. There's rules that do need to be followed, like if it's a late submission, it might be ruled out of order. But even then, the body still has the ability to vote to suspend the rules to allow a late bill. In the case of this particular bill that would have allowed Manchester to just simply trial this electronic check-in system, when it left the Senate, it was no longer in the Senate, and it came over to the House, supposedly, but the House was not in possession of it either. We weren't able to vote on it, and when I inquired on the House floor as to where this bill went, I was told by Speaker Jasper that it was sent to the state archives. I knew when he said that was not a legitimate disposal of a bill. There is no such thing as sending it to the state archives, not legitimately. I mean, you can do anything you want with a bill. It doesn't mean that it's right. So I blame Speaker Jasper and Secretary of State Gardner for really not letting the people's voice be heard. The representatives in the legislature had a right to vote on this amended bill. It deserved a right to be the rules to be suspended if that was the case, but to just dismiss it and not even give us a right to vote on it was really deplorable, and it was very much a mistake as far as I'm concerned on the Speaker's part. So needless to say, Manchester, instead of having this nice, nifty, state-of-the-art, secure check-in system that would help not only reduce lines at the polls, because come November, there's going to be lines at the polls. It was going to make our voting information more accurate. It was going to reduce an incredible workload on our local city clerk's office, which means it was going to save us money in the long run. And unfortunately, we weren't given that opportunity. Presuming I'm elected again, I will be putting in future legislation to try this again, because I do think it's something that we have to start acting on. We can't keep living off of a paper checklist with a ruler and a pencil. On that same note, if you happen to notice at your polling place here in Manchester, and I'm presuming across the state, the Secretary of State's office used some of the HAVA funds, which are the Help America Vote Act. There's a pool of money that the state of New Hampshire has, and they spent a nice chunk of it to help like blind people vote and people who can't vote in a traditional voting booth. There were little little tents set up in the poll I was at with a table, and an electronic voting system, which I kind of thought was interesting, that the Secretary of State's office was okay with people actually voting electronically, but he's not okay with people just checking in electronically. I prefer us never to vote electronically in New Hampshire. I like the idea that we fill in the little dots on the piece of paper and then we feed those through the tabulators, because if we need to do a recount, we have the paper with the little dots filled in. I did hear from somebody in my ward who didn't need to use the special voting system, but was encouraged when they went to vote to use it so that they could show that people were using it. Like I said, this particular person was fully capable of going into any of the other voting booths and filling out the dot just like normal. They filled out their ballot electronically. And I guess the way it was going to work is then you print this little receipt, and that becomes your ballot, and you take that over to the machine where you normally would feed your ballot, and instead of feeding it, because it's not going to work, they put it in the hand count ballot, and they count it as a hand count at the end of the day. What was a little concerning to me is this person told me that they voted once, but it wouldn't print. So they had to do it again in order to get it to print the receipt. Makes me kind of wonder, where'd the first one go? Did that one print later? I mean, these are things, this is why I don't support electronic voting, because I actually still think we have to make sure there's only one ballot for each voter. So I did find it interesting that the Secretary of State's office was okay with that, but they're not okay with just eliminating that green bar paper with the lines that the people have to manually enter for months afterwards. So anyways, maybe I went off on a tangent. We talked about the primary, we talked about the winners and how important it is that you get out and vote, because a lot of elections come down to a very small number of votes. We talked about the state GOP convention and the delegates and how they get elected and who was elected. The last thing I'd like to go over real briefly is who will be on the Republican ballot in November in Manchester. First, quickly, the Senate races. As it stands right now, Ross Terrell will be challenging Donna Soucy for New Hampshire Senate. Joe Duarte will be vying for Dave Booten's seat, because Dave Booten chose not to run again. And Carla Garrick will be challenging Lou D'Alessandro. That's our state Senate seats. As far as state rep, in Ward 1, you will have Joe LaChance and Mark Warden on the ballot. In Ward 2, you will have Doug Whitfield and Anthony Pugh on the ballot. In Ward 3, you will have Daniel Heck and Marav Yakov. Ward 4, this is where we're going to start getting into the hair. Ward 4 will be Dan Mattingly and Shivam Ghose on the ballot. Ward 5, Lisa Freeman, who's a current school board member, will be on the ballot. Ward 6, you've got incumbent Larry Gagne and Kirk McConville, who's running for Will Infantine's seat on the ballot. Ward 7, Andreas Reif and Brian Cole. Ward 8, Mark McLean is returning as an incumbent, and Steve Valancourt is also on the ballot. Ward 9 is Victoria Sullivan, one of my favorite reps that is on that ballot. Ward 10 is myself and Dan Garthwaite. Ward 11 is AJ Everts and Jordan Gamache, both making another stab at it. Ward 12 is Dick Marston and Clarence Gardner. In the Flotarial districts, in the 1, 2, 3 Flotarial, we have Philip Carter Harris and totally drawing a blank. I'll come back to that. Ward 4, 5, 6, and 7, we have Japheth Stevens, Kathy Souza, and Mark Langdon running. In the 8, 9, and Litchfield Flotarial, we have Mark Prue and Andy Martell. In the West Side Flotarial, we have Carlos Gonzalez and Carlos Gonzalez and Grant Morris running in there. And now I'm going to draw a blank on the 1, 2, 3 Flotarial is Philip Carter Harris, And my deepest apologies because I am drawing a blank on who is in that district. I'll look quickly. Maybe I can come up with it. Oh, totally can't remember who the other candidate is, and I apologize immensely for that. I'm sure we'll have more lists as time goes on. I'm going to hope to have a lot of the candidates on the show between now and November. If you have anything you would like to talk about as far as elections, please reach out to me at ManchTalk@gmail.com. I'd love to have some input on what you'd like to see from candidates between now and November. If you're seeing this before next Monday, the 26th, actually, I take that back. If you're seeing this anytime between now and October 6th, on Monday, October 6th, the Manchester GOP is going to host a Meet the Candidate event at Murphy's Tap Room. We will have candidates from state rep races and state senate races available. Come on over. I believe that's going to start at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the evening. I'll have more information on it next week. But it's open to the public. We're asking anybody who's looking to have questions of any Republican voters to come on out and visit with us. All in one place, give everybody an opportunity to meet their candidates and strengthen the team for the November election. That's about all I have time for this week. As I said before, please do reach out to us if you have any questions, any ideas for shows. ManchTalk@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and at Twitter at ManchTalk. Fall's upon us. It's still a great time to get out in the city. Might be starting to get a little chilly for kayaking, but take advantage of the weather. We've had a beautiful last couple days, and we've had the much needed rain, but the temps are still good. It's a great time to get out and walk. Soon the leaves will be changing. There's a lot of beauty still to be had in Manchester before the snow starts to fly. Watch for us online, and in the meantime, enjoy your week, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.